Howdy folks, today I want to talk to you about method feeder fishing, really the evolution of method feeder fishing and how it's changed over the last sort of like 10 or 15 years. Now, there's been a real trend, maybe for 4 or 5 years, of fishing big baits, big hooks, loading a big feeder up to the brim, punching it out and reeling in some beautiful fish. Now that is all very well and good on big venues like Boddington Reservoir, Boston Reservoir for example, Drayton Reservoir, those big venues where you're fishing for big fish and nothing else. But when it comes to smaller venues, the sort of venues that loads of us fish at the weekend, up and down the country, similar venues to the one I'm on today, Shearsby Valley Lakes, where there's a real mixture of fish, those bigger baits, bigger hooks, really strong tackle, you're missing out on loads of fish. So it's time, and I've had to learn these lessons as well, maybe to just take a little bit of a step back and refine things down a little bit, maybe to how we used to be fishing. So today I'm going to talk to you about finding things down, fishing smaller baits, smaller feeders and getting the most from your peg. Let's talk about the stocking on a lot of venues up and down the country. There's two main target species for me when I'm method feeder fishing. That's F1s and carp. Now we all know that carp, in a lot of these venues, they range in size. They could be 8 ounce, they could be 10 pound. I don't want to miss out on those smaller fish by targeting just the big fish. And also, when it comes to F1s, a lot of lakes are rammed full of F1s now. And these F1s range in size 8 ounce up to 3-4 pound even on some venues. And we all know how finicky these fish are. They're not picking up huge baits all the time. They might have a ravenous day where they're picking up really large baits, but most of the time they're being really choosy about what they pick up. And the feed on a lot of venues, whether you're fishing pole or whether you're fishing feeder, especially method feeder, is micro pellets. So I'm actually trying to match the hatch with the size of bait that I'm putting on the hook. I've got two hook baits that with me today. I've got 4mm Robin Red pellets, Dynamite Robin Red pellets, a really nice visual target bait, but still really small. And I've got some dead maggots. Both of those are going to go in the band. Now hair rigging baits, even maggots, is a real advantage because it leaves all of your hooks showing, and that means you get much more hookups. It means you lose less fish as well. So even hair rigging maggots, a lot of people just whack them on the hook, but hair rigging maggots is a really good string to your bow and it'll definitely catch you more fish. Feed wise, I've kept it really simple. I'm just using the fishery pellets here. Now, loads of fisheries insist on using their pellets. So fishery micros, 2 mils, I've soaked them up on the bank. You know, we've all seen countless videos of how to soak micros up, so I'm not going to go through that, but nice, soft, soaked micros, that's what I'm going to put around the feeder. And you can see that when those micros are soaked, they probably swell up to maybe 3 or even 4 mil in size. So those 4 mil Robin Red pellets that I've got as hook bait will match the size, roughly, of those micros that I'm feeding. Just that extra little ping of colour is hopefully going to help the fish target that hook bait a little bit better. Kit wise, we're going to start at the business end. Now, as I mentioned, I'm banding all my baits today, so I've got a little bait band. I've tied that knotless knot style onto a size 18 hook. You can see that I've whipped all the way down to the bait band. That means everything hangs in line, means the bait can't fall away from the hook on kick up on the hook shank. Everything is really close to the hook, so that every bait will sit really close to the bend of that hook. I think that's really important. Now, another thing that I think is really important is shortening down your hook length. When I'm using smaller baits, I like to shorten down my hook length to maybe 2.5 inches. That means the fish doesn't have to move far when it picks up the bait before it feels the weight of the feeder. I feel that when you're feeding smaller baits and fishing smaller baits, the fish isn't moving very far. He's just sitting there hovering, sucking up that bait, and therefore obviously he's not going to move very far before he blows that bait out again. So minimal movement on that hook length is important. The hook length is 0.14, it's low vis line, and I've attached that to the main line with a little quick change bead that sits inside the method feeder. I'm using an inline feeder today. I could probably use an elasticated feeder today here with the rules, but a lot of venues up and down the country insist on inline feeders. And there's a reason I'm using this particular feeder today. I watched this place being dug out a couple of years ago, and the marginal shelves here are really steep. So I'm using a gripper feeder. It's got little ridges on the base of the feeder. It helps grip the far side a lot better than a flat base feeder, and it just means I can use a slightly lighter feeder. I'm only chucking into maybe 2 foot of water across there today, and the last thing I want is a 30 or 40 gram feeder boshing in on top of those fish. So a little 20 gram feeder, it makes a nice little plop. I chuck it in, I can tighten up, and with a soft quiver tip and those ridges on the base of the feeder, it helps my feeder stay still, and that's definitely really important. Main line is 5 pound M-Tech, and the rod I'm using is a nice soft 10.5 foot feeder rod. A soft rod's really important when using small hooks. A size 18 hook is really small. I'm using inline feeders. Any movement, any bounce from a stiff rod, you're going to risk pulling hook out of the fish's mouth. And when we're catching some of the fish that we're catching today, some beautiful big fish, we don't want to lose any of them. So a nice soft rod is definitely a must. I've started today's session by casting across towards the far side. Now there's pegs opposite here today, but the scenario is exactly the same whether I'm casting up against the far bank here or whether I'm casting up against an island on a standard commercial. I've started the session by casting really tight. That's because when the sun's out, those bigger fish generally like to be in the shallow water, and I want to catch as big a fish as possible. But as the day's gone on, because that shelf's so steep, obviously any loose feed that sits on that shelf is gradually going to work its way down. Fish movement over the far side is going to disperse that feed, and it's going to settle a little bit further down the shelf. So as the session's wore on, I've ended up casting probably 2 foot short of the far bank reeds, and that's meant that I've carried on catching. I've caught a variety of fish today. I've caught F1s ranging from 8 ounce to 2 pound. I've caught some beautiful carp, ghost carp, common carp, beautiful fish. And every fish has fell to either that small robin red hard pellet or a single dead red maggot in the band. It's worth mentioning how I've been loading the feeder. Now, we've all got method molds, we can all pile our feeders to the brim and chuck it out and create a lovely neat ball. But today I've found that really counterproductive. What I've actually been doing is barely covering the feeder with pellets at all. I've been ramming pellets into the bars, just covering the bars of the feeder, and then I've been laying my hook bait on top of the feeder and just covering with a really thin layer of pellets, just to create a little tiny ball that's aerodynamic for chucking across. Now, I've kept in touch with my pellets. Obviously on my bait tray, all I've got is my hook bait little tub, my pellets, and I've got a tub of water. And all I've done every now and again is just dip my hand in the water and just ran that through those pellets, just to create a bit of tackiness and to keep them sticky and just keep in touch with them during the day. Otherwise, your pellets would dry out, they wouldn't stick to the feeder properly. And just by having a little tub of water, running your hands through it, touching a tiny bit of water through those pellets, it just helps keep on top of your bait. And bait is really important in any style of fishing. So there you go, I've had a fantastic day today. I've caught big fish, but I've also caught a lot of small fish which have filled in the gaps and kept me busy during the day. And it's that probably 20-30 pound of extra smaller fish during a match that just tips you over the edge and maybe gets you a frame place or maybe even wins the competition. If you like the videos, please subscribe. It really helps me out, and the more subscribers the better. Until next time, tight lines.